Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime and Felines. I am in a different recording spot today because it's Christmas and we have our Christmas tree up. And so my 14 felines are not interested in my office/recording studio anymore. I decided to come to them in their area and hang out with them for a while we talk about this week's case. So this week's case has to deal with Blanche Monnier, and it takes place in Poitiers, France. I'm sorry if I butcher names and places. I've never took French in high school, so I'm going to do my best, so please forgive me. So Blanche Monnier was born in Poitiers, France on March 1st, 1849 to a very privileged family. Her parents were an aristocrat mother, Madame Louise, and her father was Charles Emile. Now Louise belonged to a very noble family and noble origins. You see, the town Poitiers, France was actually her maiden name, and the town was named after her family. So she was very important. Louise did a lot of charitable work with poor people and those below her social class, and she actually got an award from the Committee of Good Works for her charitable deeds. So she was a very well-known lady and known to be a very good woman. Charles Emile had a very important position. Emile was the head of the Faculty of Fine Arts, which was a very important position at the time for a very important man. Their son Marcel had graduated from law school and was a practicing lawyer. Blanche, of course, was just a socialite, as finding a suitor to marry was her job. So this family was very upstanding and well respected in the community. Now, Blanche was 24 years old and she wasn't married yet. And back then, being that old and not married was a concern. Her family started pushing her that she needed to marry pretty quickly so she wouldn't be an old spinster. Now, Blanche was a very, very beautiful woman, and she had a lot of suitors, but she just didn't really like any of them. She'd accompany her brother a lot to the courthouse as he practiced his law, and while at the courthouse, she met a specific attorney. I'm sorry I can't find his name. I have searched everywhere, so he's just going to be known as the lawyer, okay? Now, this lawyer was an older man. He was in his 40s, and he didn't have much money, even as a practicing attorney. So he was considered a commoner and well below Blanche's social class. Blanche knew that her family would never agree to their relationship, so her and the lawyer snuck around for a while and they ended up falling in love. Eventually, Blanche announced her plans to marry the lawyer regardless of what her family thought. So Louise was very, very against this marriage and, told Blanche that this was nonsense and there was no way her daughter was marrying a penniless lawyer and she needed to break it off. Well, Blanche was undeterred. She was set that she was going to marry her true love. Now, Louise would try to plot against Blanche to try to get her, tell lies about the lawyer, trying to get her to break it off. And she even would try to bribe Blanche to change her mind. Like, hey, I'll give you this money or you can have this or that if you just cut off the relationship. And Blanche refused. Now, it wasn't much later. It was 1876, and Blanche seemed to just disappear from the public eye. None of her friends seemed to know where she went. Her lawyer love didn't even know where she went. She just vanished. Now, the police would search around the city for her, and neighbors would help look for her. Her family, anytime they were seen in public, they would be distraught and mourn for her. And her lawyer love was actually questioned in this disappearance, and he was eventually ruled out as a suspect. Now, years passed and life went on, and people seemed to forget about Blanche. In 1879, 3 years after Blanche's disappearance, her father, Charles Emile, had passed away. Now, don't know if it's coincidence or not, but this is the same year that the police decided to close the case on Blanche's disappearance as well, as everyone assumed that she was either dead or just was long gone, and her family agreed with this. Now, 25 years later, in May of 1901, an anonymous letter arrived at the France's Attorney General's office. It was crudely scribbled on a piece of paper and not signed by anyone, but when translated, it said this: Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved and living in a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth. Now, authorities had a hard time believing that this was truth because Louise Monnier and Marcel Monnier were upstanding citizens, and there's no way that could be happening in their house, but they had to investigate it just in case. The authorities would go to the house, and at first, Louise wouldn't let them in. They finally gained entry to the residence, and as they were searching the house, they came across a padlocked room in the attic. They ended up having to break the padlock and break the door down because Louise refused to give them the key to the attic door. Now, once they got inside, they found a horrible sight. This is an actual quote and testimony from one of the officers. We immediately gave the order to open the casement window. This was done with great difficulty, for the old dark-colored curtains fell down in a heavy shower of dust. To open the shutters, it was necessary to remove them from their hinges. As soon as the light entered the room, we noticed in the back, laying on a bed, her head and body covered by repulsively filthy blanket, a woman identified as Mademoiselle Blanche Monnier. The unfortunate woman was lying completely naked on a rotten straw mattress. All around her was formed a sort of a crust of excrement, fragments of meat, vegetables, fish, and rotten bread. We also saw oyster shells and bugs running across Mademoiselle Monnier and her bed. The air was so unbreathable, the odor given off by the room was so rank, it was impossible for us to stay any longer and proceed with our investigation. Blanche had been locked in a room by her family for the past 25 years, while they mourned in public of her disappearance. She was now 49 years old and was skeletal. She only weighed 55 pounds. She was also scared of the sun. When they dropped the window and the light come flooding in the room, she cowered. She did not like the sun touching her skin. Blanche was immediately transferred to a hospital in Paris, and at first, they didn't think that she would survive. Now, Louise and Marcel were arrested on the spot. Louise finally broke down and admitted to the inhumane treatment of her daughter. She'd explained to police that she disagreed with her daughter's choice for a husband. Blanche became, frustrated at her family's pressure to end the relationship, that she threatened to elope. So they took extreme measures and decided to lock her up. Now, Louise stated that the plan was not to go as far as it did, that they were just going to lock her up until Blanche decided that she was going to end the relationship and agreed to her family's demands. But Blanche stayed adamant and stayed true to her lawyer. That's when they started punishing Blanche. Not only did they lock her in there, but they chained her to the bed, and then they blocked the light from the only window in that room. Then they started only feeding her scraps of food, whatever was left over from their plates after they were done eating. Now, the room itself was filthy. It was actually used as a storage room, so there was old furniture and it was very dusty. There were rats and lice and bugs everywhere due to its filth over the years of Blanche being imprisoned in there. Now, Louise would tell Blanche that her lawyer found somebody else and fell in love and married that person, but Blanche never believed her. And she actually was right to do so, because in 1885, 9 years after Blanche's disappearance, the lawyer would pass away, and people said that he never married and he was never seen with another woman, and stayed true to Blanche as well. But after 9 years of lockup, even though the lawyer was now dead, Blanche wasn't looking so good after her treatment, and the family didn't know what Blanche was going to do if they let her loose or let her out, so they just continued to keep her locked up. I don't really know if they had a plan after that. Now, the Monnier family, being upper class and having money, they had several servants going in and out of the house daily. The servants would later testify that, well, yeah, they knew about Blanche and they would have to listen to her cries for help, but they were told to ignore them. See, Louise and Marcel would tell the servants that Blanche was insane and that she just needed locked up for her own safety. They would also tell the servants that if they left the house and told anyone outside the house, that they would be fired. Now, it was speculated that the anonymous note came from one of the servants' staff or their families, but nobody ever came forward in admitting to writing the note. Now, the neighbors, now knowing the story, were outraged that this happened to the beautiful socialite Blanche, and they threatened to burn down the Monnier house. They even went after the servants and said that they were going to follow the servants home and burn down their houses just for being complacent with this crime. Now, Louise's health hadn't been good for a number of years anyway, and seeing her neighbors who once looked at her as this upstanding woman, they are now yelling at her and demanding her head. She took a turn for the worse. She was placed in the prison infirmary, but she would end up dying 15 days after she was arrested of heart disease. But some say that she overdosed on pills because she had so much guilt for what she'd done to her daughter. It was alleged that her last words were, "Oh, my poor Blanche." Now, Marcel stood trial for this crime as well. He would state it was all his mother's idea, and due to his nearsightedness, he didn't realize how bad Blanche's living conditions were. Did he have a smelling issue too? He also stated that his mother ruled with an iron fist, and that if he did anything to intervene and try to save Blanche, that his mother would cut off all the finances and his family would suffer as well. Now, Marcel was actually married with a 17-year-old daughter at the time. Now, reports say that he lived in the house with his mother, but what I think was going on was that he actually lived somewhere else with his wife and his daughter, and he would come to the house daily to help his mother since she was kind of failing in her health. And so he was there daily, and neighbors just believe he still lived there. The public showed no mercy to his family either, even though they swore they had no idea that Blanche was locked up in the attic because they never went to Louise's house. Marcel's daughter was engaged to a upstanding French officer, but that officer quickly ended the engagement to distance himself from the family. Marcel was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 15 months. Yes, 15 months in jail. Now, remember, back then, it was actually common for family members that didn't want to put their insane family member into an asylum or a sanitarium, that they might lock them in a room in their house for their own safety. Now, hopefully they weren't treated as bad as Blanche was, but it was very common to do that with family members suffering from mental illness. And there was also no law at the time about being complacent in a crime and not intervening to save someone. So technically, at that time in history, Marcel really didn't break any laws. So he filed an appeal. He stated that Blanche could have left the room anytime she wanted, but she just chose not to. Wait, if she was chained to the bed and there was a padlock on the door, how could she leave the room anytime she wanted? He would go on to say that Blanche never suffered any violent attacks and nobody was violent towards her. And at times they would actually make one of the servants stay with her in that room just in case she needed something, other than her freedom, of course. So his sentence was actually overturned and he walked away a free man, to the horror of all the townsfolk. Marcel would end up getting his family and moving to the country far from Poitiers, France. He would end up passing away in 1913. Now, as for poor Blanche, after she was rescued, they stated that in the hospital, they gave her a bath and fresh clothes. And she actually commented in her limited speech at that time that it was nice to feel clean again and be able to breathe fresh air. I just can't imagine. Now, there was no reports that Blanche suffered from any type of mental illness before she was locked up. But, of course, being locked up for 25 years in a dark, filthy, infested room, you're gonna get some mental illness going on. So Blanche did develop some major mental issues and health issues from this whole thing. She was diagnosed with coprophilia, which is the abnormal interest and pleasure in feces. She was also diagnosed with exhibitionism, which is extravagant behavior such as showing your genitals or running around naked in order to attract attention to oneself, and schizophrenia, which is the breakdown in relation of thought, emotion, and behavior from reality. They knew that she would never be able to return to society as a normal functioning person. So after the hospital made her well again, or well as they could again, Blanche was transported to a sanatorium. She was able to regain most of her speech back, and she was able to start recognizing birds and flowers and articles that were once familiar to her before she was locked up. She would continue to avoid the sun though, and anytime the sun hit her skin, she would shy away from it, almost like she was scared of it. She ended up passing away the same year as her brother in 1913. As for the house, it is still standing today, but has been extensively remodeled inside and out, so it's hardly recognizable from what it was in the early 1900s. Nothing remains of the room that Blanche was kept prisoner in, so it's gone. There's nothing to look at. There's no tourist attraction. Now, regarding the anonymous note, some people speculated that if it wasn't a servant, that it probably came from Marcel himself. And they have a pretty good reason why they think that. It's because Louise's health was failing and Marcel was going over to the house to help her. And he thought, when my mom dies, what the heck am I going to do with Blanche? I can't continue this facade. So he wrote the note to end this tragedy. I feel this whole thing was, so based on what people think, which, today people are so concerned what people think. And these are the extreme measures that could happen, and it's so sad. The family didn't want the shame of Blanche marrying a commoner because they were afraid of what people would think about their daughter marrying a lower social class person. And they thought they would, that would just bring so much shame to the family. But when this came out, that they locked up their daughter for 25 years and she was treated cruelly, they are now nothing. They were crucified in the public. The public wanted to bring them out into the courtyard with a public execution. I mean, and that's how bad the public now hated this family and felt so bad for Blanche, that she was not even normal anymore. And she was so beautiful when she was young. And it's just such a tragedy. To make it worse, they've gone down in history for this. Here it is, 2020, and I'm talking about it on YouTube, as a lot of channels are talking about it. So it's just weird how if Blanche would have actually married the lawyer and been allowed to, we probably would have never known this family existed, besides maybe a little trivia question on how Poultier's France got its name. So, maybe think ahead and run some scenarios through your head before you lock up your kid because you're concerned about what the neighbors think. Thank you for sitting through with me on this week's case and this new area. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas. Be safe out there, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.